Jaden Smith told Clint Eastwood, "Fuck you," on live television. And no one in the studio moved for a solid 5 seconds. It was Clint's new interview series. Low-key, wood-paneled set, one camera, no frills. And he'd invited Jaden on, not just as a young Hollywood name, but as someone he said had something under the hood. The show was supposed to be about bridging generations, finding common ground between artists decades apart. But somewhere around the 15-minute mark, something cracked. Clint had asked about growing up famous, and Jaden, arms folded, had given short, distant answers, clearly uninterested in the usual questions. Then Clint, trying to push the conversation deeper, said something offhand about how being a kid doesn't mean you're already a philosopher. And Jaden blinked, leaned forward, and muttered the words with dead clarity. "Fuck you, Clint." You could hear a bottle cap hit the floor offset. Clint didn't flinch, but the way he straightened his back said everything. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was weighty, real, the kind that makes your skin crawl if you're in the room. No music, no edit, no applause. Just two men, one young and burning, the other old and staring at him like he'd seen something through him, not just at him. The tension wasn't about the words themselves, but about what they exposed. Something cracked open that wasn't going to be closed easily. It wasn't over. And if you think that moment was the peak, wait, the real story hadn't even started yet. Clint Eastwood sat motionless for a few moments after Jaden Smith's words, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked, sharp as ever, not with anger exactly, but with the weight of someone who's seen too much to be surprised and yet still couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. He adjusted his position in the chair slowly, like every movement was a measured choice, and finally said, low but firm, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The studio crew didn't dare cut the feed. Clint didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He just stared at Jaden like he was looking straight through him, not at him, and that quiet, steady gaze was heavier than any outburst. Jaden leaned back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable now, like even he wasn't sure why he'd said it. Clint turned his chair slightly, breaking eye contact for the first time, and nodded to the producer to pause recording. Then he stood, walked off set, took out his phone, and made a call. Not to his manager, not to the network, but directly to Will Smith. There was something in Clint's voice, not outrage, not drama, but a kind of disappointed gravity. When Will picked up and Clint calmly said, "Will, I just had your son tell me to go fuck myself on my own show." The silence on the other end was immediate. Clint waited, letting it sit. Will finally spoke, quiet and tense, asking what had happened, what the context was. Clint didn't embellish. He just told him straight. "I asked him about how he sees himself as an artist. He didn't like it, and he said it, clear as day." Will took a breath, then another, and apologized, not in the way people apologize for PR or headlines, but in that soft, slow way that said he was genuinely blindsided. He told Clint it wasn't about him, that Jaden had been in a strange place lately, off, moody, maybe restless in a way that no one close to him had fully understood yet. He said Jaden had been shutting people out, saying things without thinking, almost like trying to provoke a reaction out of the world just to see if it still cared. Clint listened without interrupting, not because he agreed, but because he respected Will enough to let him speak. Then Clint asked the one question that had been sitting in his chest since the words left Jaden's mouth. Why would he speak to me like that? I didn't come at him. I wasn't cruel. I was trying to understand him, and he threw it away like I was some relic trying to pick a fight. Will didn't have an answer. He just said he'd talk to him. Tonight, directly, no assistants, no handlers. And he thanked Clint for not making it into a spectacle. And Clint, who could have gone public, who could have spun the moment into a viral weapon, just nodded and said, "Tell him I'm still here. If he wants to talk like a man, I'll be here." A few hours later, the set was quiet. Most of the crew had left. The room smelled like coffee and cold cables. Clint sat alone in the interview chair, rewatching the footage. He didn't fast forward. He watched the entire exchange again, carefully, like a detective combing through a crime scene. The moment Jaden said it, Clint hit pause. The frame froze on Jaden's face. Not angry, not triumphant, just empty, like someone trying on a mask and not knowing if it fit. Clint shook his head slightly and deleted the clip from his phone. It wasn't about saving face. It was about not reducing something complicated to a soundbite. The next morning, Jaden showed up at the studio alone. No team, no PR, just him, hands in his hoodie, looking younger than usual. Clint was already there, drinking black coffee and reading a thin folder of notes. But he looked up and nodded. Jaden stood in front of him for a long second before speaking. He didn't sit. He just said, low and fast, "I don't know why I said it. I don't hate you. I don't even know you. I guess I was pissed and didn't know at what." Clint didn't answer right away. He let the words settle. Then he asked, "And now?" Jaden looked down, then up, then finally sat. He was still, like the fight in him had drained out overnight. "Now I feel like shit," he said. "I've never felt smaller." Clint didn't smile. He didn't let him off easy, but he nodded. "Good. Means you're still human." There was a long pause between them. Not awkward, just real. Then Clint asked quietly, "You want to finish the conversation?" Jaden nodded. "Yeah," he said, "but for real this time." And they did. The cameras stayed off. What they talked about didn't matter to the audience, not yet. What mattered was that they talked, not across a table as symbols, but face to face, as two people trying to understand why things break and whether they're worth fixing. And though they never planned to air that first interview, and probably never will, the truth is something else happened that day, something more important than a show, something still unfolding. Because sometimes the real moment isn't the explosion. It's what happens after the smoke clears. And if you think that was the end of it, you're wrong. There's more. A lot more. Jaden started apologizing quietly at first, almost like he was testing the words in his mouth, unsure if they'd come out right or even matter anymore. And then, as he spoke, something in his voice cracked open, and it all spilled out faster than he could control. He said he didn't know what had come over him, that he wasn't angry at Clint, not really, that maybe he wasn't even angry at anything specific, but just lost in this constant static of pressure, attention, expectation. And somewhere in all that noise, Clint had asked one honest question, and Jaden had thrown a grenade instead of answering, because it was easier to blow it up than to admit he didn't know who he was supposed to be in that moment. That sometimes he walked into rooms and felt like everyone had already made up their minds about him before he said a word. And Clint, this icon, this monument, had looked at him like he expected something real. And Jaden had panicked, had defaulted to rebellion, to detachment, to a sharp edge he didn't even know he'd been carrying until it cut through the wrong person. And now he just felt ashamed. Not because of the cameras, not because of the headlines, but because when he looked at Clint now, he didn't see some outdated symbol of the 80s past. He saw a man who was still showing up, still trying to connect, still listening, even when it wasn't easy. And Jaden said he was sorry, genuinely, that he never should have said it, and he swore he wouldn't speak like that again. Not to him, not to anyone who showed him respect, and that he hoped maybe they could still have the conversation they were supposed to have before everything derailed. And Clint listened to all of it. Didn't interrupt once, just sat there with his hands folded and his eyes steady. And when Jaden finally ran out of words and looked at him like a kid waiting to be scolded, Clint simply nodded and said, "I forgive you. I get it. I really do." And the weight in the room shifted just a little, like some invisible tension had been released and replaced with something more human, more fragile, and maybe even more interesting than anything they could have planned. And after a moment, Clint asked if Jaden still wanted to roll tape. And Jaden nodded, and they returned to the chairs. The lights came up, the cameras clicked on again, and they started over. Not from the beginning, but from the middle. From the place where two people pick up the pieces and try again. And Clint didn't ask easy questions, and Jaden didn't give rehearsed answers. And what unfolded wasn't flashy or viral, but it was real in the way things usually aren't when the red light is blinking. And they talked about what it means to grow up in front of an audience, about legacy and missteps, and how sometimes being watched makes it harder to know who you are. And Clint shared how even after all these years, He still has days where he feels like he's pretending to be himself. And Jaden said that made him feel less alone, and the air between them warmed, softened, like respect was being built in real time. And when the final question came, Clint didn't even ask it out loud. He just looked at Jaden, raised an eyebrow and waited, and Jaden smiled faintly and said, "Yeah, I'm still figuring it out, but I'm trying." And Clint said, "That's all any of us can do." And with that, the interview ended, not with applause, not with sound bites, but with a quiet nod and two hands shaking off camera. And they left the studio in different directions, but not as strangers anymore, not as a headline, but as two men who'd faced something uncomfortable and didn't run from it. And maybe that doesn't make for a flashy news story, but it mattered. You could feel it in the silence afterward, in the crew who lingered a little longer, in the editor who played back the raw footage and didn't cut a single word. And somewhere down the line, when the episode finally airs, people won't just remember the outburst. They'll remember the way it turned into something else entirely, something unexpected, something better, and maybe that's the whole point. Not every mistake ends in ruin. Not every broken moment stays broken. And sometimes, if you stay in the room long enough, you witness something rare. The exact moment a wall comes down and a real person steps forward, and it doesn't end here. Not really, because there's still more to come. There always is. And if you've been watching this whole time wondering what it all meant, just wait. The story's not finished.